NBC 10 at issue with concerns about taxes, health care, jobs, big government, and national security. Republican candidates say why they should be chosen on April 24th to take on incumbent Democratic Senator Bob Casey. A Republican Senate Candidates Forum now on NBC 10 at issue. And good morning. I'm Steve Highsmith. Welcome to a special edition of NBC 10 at issue for the next 30 minutes on NBC 10 and NBC Philadelphia Nonstop, and continuing for another 30 minutes on Nonstop. It's the race for the U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania, featuring candidates for the Republican Senate nomination. This program will also be found on NBC10.com. 5 Republicans will be on the ballot in the Pennsylvania U.S. Senate Republican primary. Joining me now in alphabetical order, businessman David Christian, former State Representative Sam Rohr, attorney Mark Scaringi, and businessman Steve Welch. This note, candidate Tom Smith was invited, but his campaign indicated that Mr. Smith was unable to attend. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate you taking the time. Now, 2 recent polls have said that somewhere between 50 and 80% roughly of likely Republican voters just don't know who they're going to vote for. And so with that in mind, I'd like to ask you to talk about conservatism, about what it means to be a conservative, and feel free to contrast yourself with others, because people, when they go in the polls, they're going to have to do that. They're going to have to choose among you. So starting with you, Mr. Christian, what makes you a conservative and the right candidate in this case?
Well, I think you have to start off with the issues. The issues traditionally make people one thing: conservative, liberal, independent, or one-eyed horn-toad, whatever you may be there. But I'm a conservative mainly for the issues. The issues on, in terms of the Second Amendment, I'm a strong Second Amendment advocate there. Stand down strongly for the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, the right to keep secure your house. Pro-life, there's a number of issues that you keep going right down the list there. I think almost every one of us mirror the same issues. One of the unique things I think that I have a little more experience in is leadership. And leadership in terms of addressing issues independently, taking on that initiative, making decisions that are critical decisions, standing up to Presidents of the United States when you have to stand up to Presidents of the United States, standing up to governors, standing up to whomever it may be, and making a bottom-line decision.
Thank you. Mr. Rohr?
Steve, I would define myself as a constitutional conservative. And I've always done it that way because I think conservative just means that you don't buy into the excesses of government. But a constitutional conservative, to me, defines it even further and says that a person's actions, my votes over my years in office have been very, very clearly constitutional. They have been very clearly moral votes. They have been the kinds not grown the size of government, respected the taxpayers' dollars, knowing that I in office don't have a right to their tax, to their wallets. I have a responsibility to steward their finances, and all of that factors into it. So clearly, to me, a conservative means, and a constitutional conservative means, I am guided by higher law, I'm guided by my oath, and that my actions in office will reflect that, and my votes have done that.
Mr. Rohr, thank you. Mr. Scaringi.
Well, I'm a limited government constitutional conservative, and that means smaller, limited government confined by the Constitution. And I'll give you an example of how Steve and I are different. Steve says that he's a decentralist, but yet he wants and supports a central bank through the Federal Reserve System. And it's the central bank that prints money that fuels big government. So if you really want to decentralize government, you have to decentralize the central bank that's being used to create this big government. And in my plan, I do that by decentralizing the Federal Reserve and returning free banking, decentralized banking.
Mr. Welch?
I'm a limited government conservative. I think it's critical and it's clear that this government has overstepped its bounds in so many different ways. And I think the reason for that is we've sent too many people to Washington that has just never done anything other than run for office. I think it's time, and I think the people of Pennsylvania and this country know it's time we send people to Washington that have done things, that understand this economy from the ground up.
There's going to be a lot of talk in the campaign, already has, but it's going to intensify with commercials and everything else. So you voted for Barack Obama in the 2008 primary and supported Joe Sestak before that. How do you square that if someone says, oh, I don't know what Mr. Welch is all about, I'm still learning about it?
Sure, yeah. I've been a lifetime Republican from the time I was 18 years old on. I will tell you, in 2005, the Republican Party had the presidency, the House, the Senate, and they exploded the size of government. And out of frustration, changed my registration. I did vote for John McCain for President of the United States, to be crystal clear. And since the stimulus package was voted on, it was really when I got involved in politics actively for the first time about 3 years ago. And over the last 3 years, have worked for Tom Corbett, primary of 2010. Actually left my job, worked full-time for Pat Toomey to make sure he was elected.
Let me pick up on something else about the state system here. Mr. Rohr, do you think the state Republican committee is controlled by party regulars or by the elite. And they are not in tune, and they almost pay lip service to people who are Tea Partiers.
I think, unfortunately, I think the leadership generally right now is not in tune with the populace. You know, 84% of the primary voting Republicans said do not endorse in this race. 84%. And I had that discussion. I said, what a great opportunity for the party to reach their arms around a large number of people and bring them into the party. Chose not to do that. I think one of the problems with party leadership on both parties, Washington or in the state level, is that they tend to be more concerned often too much about consolidating power rather than reaching out and serving the people.
Mr. Cringer, do you think it was wrong for people in the party to try to knock Mr. Christian off the ballot? They failed. He's still here, but do they think they were wrong?
Well, I do think they were wrong, and we need a decentralized Republican state committee. And Steve said he would support the endorsement process if it was organic, meaning if it was from the ground up. But we all witnessed what happened. It was the most inorganic endorsement process I've ever witnessed. It was from the top down, and that's why it was wrong, and that's why there are so many rank-and-file Republicans who are so angry and upset with what happened there in Hershey.
You mentioned his name so quick. Do you want to say anything reference to that process?
Well, for those that don't know, there's 357 elected Republican committee people throughout the state. Everybody in this race and several others that are no longer in the race traveled the state and met all 357 of those committee people. And you know, I'm proud to have their endorsement. I think what they're engaged in this process and know that we're the best person to beat Bob Casey in the fall and make sure that President Obama loses Pennsylvania.
I brought your name up. What do you think about the fact that they tried to kick you off?
I think that's part of the process. Excuse me again, I think I'll need some water, but I think that's why they call it politics. I mean, they did try to knock me off. The thing is, I proved my mettle, I proved my steel, I proved Dave Christian, and you know, I came and I fought back. I was in Commonwealth Court in Harrisburg. Unfortunately, if someone erratically wrote their name, and I had to bring that person in because they had a stroke, and that's why they erratically wrote their name. So it was really unfair to those that wanted to participate by signing petitions.
I want to, and I think you can, to mention just one word right here, and it's either going to be Romney, Paul, Gingrich, or Santorum. Who would you select? Who's closest to what you believe? Romney, Santorum, Gingrich, or Paul?
Whoever can beat President Obama.
That's not an answer. Romney, Paul, Gingrich.
Whoever can beat President Obama.
All right.
I would say Paul for freedom, personal liberty, and the constitutional republic.
Very close to Santorum.
I'm for Christian, and I think it's my own private issue as to who runs for president of the United States.
It doesn't matter to you?
I think they're all conservatives. I think anybody is better than Barack Obama on the Republican ticket at this stage of the game.
All right.
Any one of them.
One other question along these lines. Does it matter to any of you that Marco Rubio and Paul Ryan have recently endorsed Romney? Are you impressed? Not impressed?
Certainly. I think it shows these are party leaders, and I think it's great that they're getting behind the candidate they believe is the strongest.
And this Senator Arlen Specter this week said on MSNBC, if you think women have no place in the workforce, if you're against contraception, if you think John Kennedy's speech in Houston separating church and state was wrong, you're too far out of the mainstream to be president. He was talking about Rick Santorum. Is that a fair comment by the former senator?
I mean, that's his opinion, and certainly Senator Specter should have his ability to voice his opinion.
I don't listen to anything that Senator Specter says about America, about what's right and what's wrong.
I don't think that he took the right take on those comments. Frankly, it has nothing to do about limiting women. It has everything to do with about limiting the ability of government to dictate what women do. That's the big difference.
I heard Senator Specter say that, and I realized what he was trying to do was sell his book. So he was sensationalizing, and he was selling his book there.
Right up ahead, the president, Iran, oil, and later taxes and the debt. Ahead on NBC 10 at Issue. Stay tuned.
You're watching NBC.
Back on NBC 10 at Issue and the Republican race for the Senate nomination. Up ahead, taxes and spending, health care, and more. But right now, we're going to talk about the President of the United States. If you were a U.S. Senator today, and President Obama was caught whispering to Russian President Medvedev saying, give me some space, I'll have more flexibility after the election, what would you do as a senator?
Well, you know, I would encourage the President of the United States to reform our foreign policy, to get our foreign policy back to the foreign policy of our founding fathers, that we are a republic and not an empire, and get rid of this hyper-interventionism that is causing all kinds of animosity and blowback around the world, and spending American soldiers' blood and spilling their blood and spending our treasure. And I want to get back to the original foreign policy.
But you don't think he did anything wrong?
No, I don't.
Okay. as well.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the president across the board. You're seeing this on his foreign policy. He tends to basically tell in advance what we're going to do. He basically lays it out there. And I think that's bad negotiating tactics. I mean, Afghanistan's a perfect example of letting the other side know exactly what the American Army's going to do. I think that's a mistake.
Mr. Christian.
I think immediately I would have shot off a letter to the president from my desk, the U.S. Senate, to the White House, stating, what did you mean by, give me some time, and I'll have some time, I'll have some leeway. I'd like to know what he meant by that. Is he talking about Central Asia and talking about the air bases that are surrounding China there that we're using right now to help support the war in Afghanistan?
A lot of people think he means the defense missile systems that are...
There's a lot of issues on the table. Right now, Israel supposedly is moving an air base into Azerbaijan, and they're surrounding, you have a situation there with Iran. So there's a lot of questions there, and I think it would warrant a letter from one senator to the president.
Steve, I would have used my position and would use that position to highlight to asking the question, what do you mean by that, Mr. President? And I would have been doing that along the path. I mean, frankly, the president bowing to the king of Saudi, or to making those comments, or making derogatory comments about Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, are all indications that we have a commander-in-chief and a president who is not only not clear, but actually undermining perhaps our security with our friends and making alliance with our enemies. That's a big problem. I would use that position of senator to use that pulpit to highlight these things.
I'm not making this accusation. I want to be clear about how I'm perceiving this. Any of you saying this is a near treasonous act?
Well, my comment is that I think that it's inappropriate, and it raises the question in light of the other aspects that I just mentioned, that says that it demands almost a response from the president on what did you actually mean by that comment.
It's absolutely not even close to treasonous. Russia is not our enemy. We need to be working with Russia and establishing a strong relationship with Russia. Why are so many in our foreign policy elite trying to antagonize the Russians and continue this Cold War that's been over for many, many years?
As a U.S. Senator, can you live with a nuclear Iran?
No.
And what would you do about it?
I think you have to put it in context. Iran is a country that has made it crystal clear that if they had the opportunity, they'd put a bomb in the United States. They would certainly wipe Israel off the face of the earth. It is a destabilizing event to the world, and it cannot be tolerated. By the same token, I don't think we need to be negotiating this on CNN. Our allies need to know that we're going to stand behind them. And I I think that
But how do you take out something that people say only a nuclear weapon could take out? They've gone so far down on the ground.
I don't think that intelligence is actually correct.
Mr. Christian?
Intelligence is critical. We listened to another individual state that he was going to go to bomb Israel and Saddam Hussein, and we went to war. Intelligence is critical, and especially, as we all know here, every person at the stage, including yourself, we looked at some bad intelligence, unfortunately, but it came from many different countries around the world. Our allies talking about weapons of mass destruction.
Any of the three of you haven't responded yet about this. Would you use U.S. military force to prevent them from having a nuclear bomb?
I would support Israel with, as we have in the past, with armament.
I would say follow the lead of Israel. We're there to support them as our ally in the Middle East.
I would not follow the lead of Israel. I would follow the security interests, the national security interests of the United States of America. And Iran is not even near acquiring a nuclear weapon. And we have to understand what the facts are and deal with the facts as they exist on the ground.
More on this and more on taxes and health care and more ahead on NBC 10 at Issue, this special edition of Decision 2012.
You're watching NBC 10 at Issue.
Back on NBC 10 at Issue with Decision 2012, the Republican race for the U.S. Senate, and several of the candidates are here. Mr. Welch, I think I heard you say one time, big business is in bed with big government?
Absolutely.
Would you end oil subsidies?
Yes.
All right. What else would you end?
I think the entire
a lot of corporate stuff?
Yeah, I think the entire tax code needs to be thrown away and start over again. It's literally taller than my daughter. It's distorting the marketplace. It's too complex. It's making America less efficient.
Mr. Scaringi, I think I even heard you say one time that you would like to eliminate the tax on work, savings, and investment.
Sure, I'd love to. I want to cut taxes on the oil and gas industry and on all industries, on individuals, businesses. That's going to free up the entrepreneurial spirit and put the American people back to work.
Where do you get the revenue from, and how much would government have to be cut to make federal government balanced?
Well, you have to cut spending. There's a plan to cut spending by $1 trillion, yes, over the next 3 years, and that gets us back to a spending level that we had in the late 90s, and you can do that without the tax on work, savings, and investment.
Well, I think, whether you call it crony capitalism or not, yes, there's big business that's been in bed with the government and the subsidies, buyouts, picking winners and losers, determining windmills and solar panels and using our taxpayer dollars to subsidize are an example of that kind of thing, which I do not support.
Mr. Christian? We need a flat tax. That's it. We need a flat tax for business. We need a flat tax also for individuals. I don't care if the flat tax is 12%. I don't care if the flat tax is 10%. If 50% of the American people are not paying taxes, we need everyone to pay taxes. You're talking about revenue, then you get 100% of the people paying taxes. And if you're a vendor out there selling hot dogs and you're selling for $1, and 10 cents on that dollar goes to federal income tax.
A real quick number. What would you really fight so hard for that you'd be exhausted? You had a 10 or 12% figure. You're 9.99, Herm Cainer?
Well, I think that's a good goal. I'm not 100% embrace that, but it's a good goal because it's simplified, and that's what we got to do, is simplify the tax code.
Give me a percentage.
How about zero? Let's get the tax rates down as far as we can. Yes, let's cut spending. Let's cut $1 trillion, and let's get our tax rates down to zero.
You cut the $1 trillion in special interest deduction, the top rate goes down into the very low 20s.
All right. Mr. Christian, you co-founded the Council for Vietnam Veterans. You said Ronald Reagan used to call you kid, right?
Yes.
Do you think Ronald Reagan would have tolerated a situation where we have our servicemen and women serve multiple tours, their families go what they're going through, and most of the rest of us in the country are not asked to sacrifice anything, including the wealthiest, which are simply asked to pay 4% more? What's wrong with making them pay for a short period of time 4% more to balance the budget?
Ronald Reagan, initially, I will tell you that he would put the troops first and foremost, all people in uniform first and foremost. He brought the Vietnam veterans out of the shadow, and he said that they had a gallant cause there, and he established the Vietnam veterans as being somewhat legitimate and courageous for their sacrifices, their service, and he brought the Vietnam veterans home. He was the first one to welcome them home. So I'm saying that Ronald Reagan would be worrying about the troops, these 4 tours, these multiple tours, unless they're voluntary tours. They're people like Special Forces that want to do these tours, and happens to be a voluntary situation. But to take someone who's in water purification, take someone who happens to be a truck driver, take someone who happens to be a mechanic, and multiple tours is not the way that
what about the shared sacrifice? There doesn't seem to be much sacrifice on some Americans' part.
People are going to the ball games, and they're watching their baseball, and they're having their beer, and they're watching everything in the world go by, and they don't know that there's wars going on in the world.
Comment on the same thing?
I think shared sacrifice is an attitude that's exhibited by leadership, which has not been exhibited by this president or many who are down in Washington. And certainly asking the the top percent to contribute more is not shared sacrifice. That's more of a redistribution of wealth concept.
Right,
shared sacrifice usually means I have to pay more, while half of the American people pay nothing in federal income tax to support the government. That's unfair. That's not what our country is all about. Ronald Reagan would pull our troops out of Afghanistan. He would have done that years and years ago. He was not for nation building. He was for an American first foreign policy, and that's what we have to get back to.
Mr. Welch?
Our brave men and women have served us very well. I think it's one of the reasons we need to make sure they have the resources as we look at Afghanistan and past in Iraq. It's critical that we make sure they have the resources to make sure they're safe.
And what about this shared sacrifice?
I think that it's a problem. I think there's no question when you have such a small percentage of society sacrificing so much and the rest of us not, I think that is a problem.
Do you have a solution?
I don't.
Still to come, more on this special edition of NBC 10 at Issue, the race for the U.S. Senate, the Republican primary. Decision 2012, the Republican race for U.S. Senate continues. Quick question about the refineries. They're closing down or about to close in the Philadelphia area, in this region. Anything the U.S. Senate can do about it?
Certainly. I think this is a good example of how Obama and Casey really have not laid out a path that has allowed us to be competitive as a nation. Think about it. Gas prices are so high. Why are refineries closing? That just doesn't make sense. And the reason is we've created an environment in this country where we are driving companies offshore because it's just too difficult to adhere to all the government regulations.
The refineries here are closing down because the companies, Sunoco and the oil and gas companies, can't make a profit because their taxes are too high, and Steve does not want to reduce their taxes. I do. If we can reduce their taxes, they'll have greater profit margins, and they'll stay here in Philadelphia.
Right. Yes or no, do you want to reduce their taxes or raise their taxes?
We absolutely need to reduce tax rates in the country.
Next.
Primarily, I think, is the regulatory climate. Taxes are high. There's no question about it. The climate is not good, primarily created by federal government, but the regulatory climate is what's actually shutting down the refineries faster than anything. saying the Senate ought to be doing something about it.
Mr. Christian.
It is the regulatory climate. People are still moving into Massachusetts. They call it Massachusetts for a reason. However, right now we have ConocoPhillips closing down, and we also have Sunoco closing too. So there's 3 refineries closing down. The U.S. Senate can step in. We can talk about different things that we can do and work with the local people with tax credits, whatever it may be, to get people to stay here, and also address the regulatory issues that we're talking about. What are these regulatory issues? The Environmental Protection Agency, it seems like the Environmental Pollution Agency anymore. They just jump in and they're saying you're a polluter before you even start.
I want to talk about the Environmental Protection Agency, about the health care, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as it's known. We're about halfway through our Republican Senate Candidates Forum in the race for the GOP nomination for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania. I'm Steve Highsmith. Thanks for being with us so far. We continue after a short break with David Christian, Sam Rohr, Mark Scaringi, and Steve Welch on NBC Philadelphia Nonstop. And if you are watching on NBC 10, please turn to NBC Philadelphia Nonstop right now or to NBC10.com.